The sun was sinking low, spilling long shadows across the single dusty street of Dry Creek. The town breathed uneasily, as though it already knew what was about to unfold. Men leaned against the posts outside the saloon, their whispers carrying like dry leaves on the evening wind. Women at the well drew water with their eyes lowered, stealing glances toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond the desert ridge, a storm was gathering, though no one was sure if it was thunder or trouble that pressed against the sky. Elias Boone came walking down from his small ranch outside town, the weight of the day clinging to his boots. He was not the sort to draw attention, never had been. A quiet man, once a scout for the cavalry, he had long ago traded rifle and saddle for plow and soil. Folks knew him as steady, honest, the kind who tipped his hat to widows and shared grain with neighbors in lean winters. His hands were calloused from work, not gunfights, and his voice carried more kindness than threat. Yet tonight, as he crossed the street, the murmurs followed him like shadows, accusations he hadn't heard spoken to his face, only hissed behind closed doors. The saloon doors creaked open, spilling lamplight onto the dirt. Sheriff Colby stepped out, flanked by his deputies, men with pistols that gleamed in the fading light. Colby had been wearing that star for 5 years, but folks had long since stopped seeing it as a symbol of law. It was power he wore, bought and bartered, twisted until justice bent beneath it. His deputies, Hale and McKinnon, carried the same smug weight, men who grew rich off fear and silence. And now they had found their scapegoat. "Boone," Colby called, his voice booming across the street, slicing through the hush. "You best stop right there." Elias froze, his hat brim shading his eyes. He studied the sheriff calmly, though his pulse quickened. "Evening, Sheriff," he said, careful and steady. "What seems to trouble you?" The sheriff's lips curled into something that might have been a smile, if not for the venom in it. "Murder's what troubles me. Town banker shot dead last night. Witnesses place you near the office. And word is, gold's gone missing." His voice carried loud enough for the gathered crowd to hear, each word hammered like a nail. "You'll answer for it." The crowd stirred. Elias felt the weight of eyes pressing into his back. He opened his mouth to protest, but Hale shoved forward, pressing a pistol into his ribs. "Best keep quiet," the deputy hissed. "Don't want to make it worse." Elias's jaw tightened. He had been in town last night, yes, delivering hay to the livery before the storm rolled in. He had passed by the banker's office, as anyone might. But murder? Theft? It was madness. Yet in the eyes of the lawmen before him, he saw no interest in truth. He saw calculation. The banker had crossed them, perhaps, or maybe the missing gold had already found its way into their pockets. What better way to cover the trail than to paint an honest man guilty? "I didn't," Elias began, but Hale slammed a fist into his gut. He doubled over, the breath stolen from him. Laughter rang out from a few men at the saloon steps, the kind of laughter that thrived on cruelty. Still, others in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Old Mrs. Crawley wrung her hands. Young Tom, who'd worked Elias's ranch last summer, whispered harshly to his father, who silenced him with a shake of the head. The town was divided, torn between fear of the badge and faith in the man, now crumpled in the dirt. Colby stepped forward, hand resting on his revolver. "You come quiet, Boone, or I'll see you shot right here." His words were calm, deadly certain, and he knew the crowd would not dare interfere. Elias rose slowly, dust clinging to his shirt, his eyes fixed on the sheriff. "You know this ain't right," he said, his voice low but steady, like the growl of distant thunder. "And someday the truth will come for you." Colby sneered. "Truth's what I say it is." He nodded to his deputies. "Shackle him." The cold bite of iron closed around Elias's wrists, chains clinking as they forced his arms behind his back. Each snap of metal echoed through the silent street. He kept his head high, though inside he burned with shame, anger, and the sick weight of betrayal. This town, where he had given his years and sweat, now turned its face from him. Even those who believed in his innocence kept their silence, for speaking out meant ruin. And still, he saw their eyes, hesitant, sorrowful, guilty. They knew. As the deputies dragged him forward, the desert wind picked up, swirling grit into the faces of the crowd. It carried the scent of dust, of rain not yet fallen, of something about to break. Elias stumbled once, but he would not bow his head. Not to Colby. Not to any man who twisted the law for his own gain. The people watched him pass, whispers spreading faster than wildfire. "It can't be him." Some murmured, "Boone ain't that kind." Others shook their heads, unwilling to speak but unwilling to believe either. They shoved him through the saloon doors, laughter and music inside cutting off into stunned silence as the chained man appeared. Cards froze in gamblers' hands. A fiddler bow hovered mid-note. Every patron turned to watch as Elias was paraded through, a man condemned before trial. Colby wanted spectacle. He wanted everyone to see what happened to those who stood outside his circle of power. "Ladies and gents," the sheriff called, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. "The murderer of our good banker has been caught. Justice moves swift in Dry Creek." A roar of approval rose from his loyalists, those who drank on his coin and lined their pockets with his favors. But others sat rigid, their silence more damning than words. Elias's eyes met Clara Dawson's across the room. The widow, known for her sharp tongue and unyielding will, stood near the back, her hands clenched white around a glass. She did not shout, did not cry, but her gaze burned with something fierce. Elias held it as long as he could before Hale shoved him onward. The deputies hauled him toward the jail, the chains rattling with every step. Outside, dusk had deepened to night, lanterns flickering along the street. The desert wind howled louder, as though the land itself mourned the injustice. Townfolk trailed behind, some jeering, others solemn, all caught in the grip of fear. For in Dry Creek, power had spoken, and no one dared to challenge it. As they reached the jailhouse, Elias paused, his boots planted firm. He turned his head enough for his voice to carry, steady and cold. "This ain't over," he said. The words were not shouted, but they carried like iron across the night. "You can chain a man, but you can't chain the truth." Hale yanked hard on the shackles, dragging him inside. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing him in darkness. Outside, the crowd dispersed slowly, torn between the sheriff's version of justice and the man they had known all their lives. Some went home silent, unable to shake the sight of an honest rancher hauled away in chains. Others returned to their drink, convincing themselves that the law could not lie. But Clara Dawson stood long in the street, the lantern light glinting in her eyes, a storm of thought brewing behind them. The jail was a squat stone building that smelled of iron and dust, its single lantern casting more shadow than light. Elias Boone sat on the hard cot, his wrists raw where the shackles bit into his skin. Outside, Dry Creek had gone quiet, though the laughter of the sheriff and his deputies drifted in from the front office. Every echo of their voices stoked a fire inside him, a fire banked low but not extinguished. He had seen betrayal before, out in the wilderness when comrades broke faith and left men to die, but never had it cut so deep as this night, in the very heart of a town he had once believed in. A cough broke the silence from the neighboring cell. An old man stirred, his beard long and matted, his back bent like a bow. His eyes glimmered faintly in the lantern's light. "Didn't expect to see Boone in here," he rasped, voice worn from years of smoke and whiskey. "Town always said you were straight as a rifle barrel." Elias turned, studying him. He recognized the old-timer, Jedediah, a drifter who'd been tossed in and out of cells more times than most could count. "They say I killed the banker," Elias said, his voice steady though his heart rebelled at the words. "Stole gold, too." "Lies, every one of 'em." Jedediah chuckled, dry as bones rattling. "Course it's lies. Colby's boy's been bleeding this town for years. Banker must have crossed a line. And when they needed someone to blame, well," he gestured weakly with his shackled hands. "An honest man makes the perfect villain. No one sees it coming." The words dug deep, not because Elias didn't know them already, but because hearing them spoken made them solid, inescapable. He leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes. Images flooded his mind. The open plains, long nights as a scout for the cavalry, when he tracked raiders through canyons, when he could read the land as easily as another man read a ledger. His rifle had spoken true back then. Each shot deliberate, each action a matter of survival. He had walked away from it all, thinking peace was possible, that a man could put violence behind him. Now that past stirred restlessly inside, reminding him he was not just a rancher. They had chained a wolf and called it a lamb. Through the thin walls, the sheriff's laughter swelled. "Ain't nobody gonna question it," Colby boasted. "Boone's as good as hung already. Town'll sleep easier thinking we serve justice." Another voice chimed in, Deputy McKinnon, slick and eager. "And that gold? Well, it's found a safer home. Banker had it coming anyhow." Their laughter roared, filling the night, careless and cruel. Elias's fists clenched against the cot. Each word confirmed what he already knew. They were covering their own tracks, lining their pockets, and he was the shield for their sins. He thought of the townsfolk, silent in the street, some turning their eyes away, some looking on with guilt. There had been belief in a few of those faces. Clara Dawson's eyes in the saloon burned still in his memory, fierce and unwavering. She had not spoken, but her silence had been heavier than words, a weight that lingered in his chest. The old man leaned closer to the bars, voice dropping to a whisper. "You ain't alone, Boone. Some folks see through it. Clara, for one. Widows got more backbone than most men in this town. And I heard tell of a rider coming quiet last week. Keeps to the edge of town. Folks say he ain't here for trade." Jedediah's smile was crooked, sly. Maybe the wind shifting. Elias studied him, suspicion pricking. "And why tell me this?" "Because lies rot a town quicker than drought," the old man said simply. "And I've seen enough rot to know when something's about to fall." Hours dragged, each one heavy with silence and the occasional scrape of boots from the lawmen outside. Elias dozed and dreamed of open trails, of the crack of rifles, of brothers in arms lost to ambush and betrayal. He remembered the last time he'd held his revolver in earnest, remembered the calm that came with focus, the way the world narrowed to the target, the certainty of action. The skills hadn't left him. They had merely been buried under years of soil and sweat. Now they stirred again, whispering that his story wasn't meant to end in a cell. Near midnight, the jail door creaked open. Clara Dawson stepped inside, her shawl drawn tight against the desert wind. Hale trailed behind, grinning as though escorting her were some private joke. She ignored him, her eyes fixed on Elias. "I wanted to see for myself," she said, her voice strong despite the tremor beneath it. "They say you killed Henry Tate. I don't believe it." Elias rose, chains clinking. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "They'll make trouble for you." "They already have," she replied, her eyes glinting. "Colby's men have bled this town dry. My husband died under their watch, and they called it justice then, too. I won't sit quiet again." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "There are those who still trust you. Don't lose hope." Hale tugged at her arm, sneering. "Time's up, widow." But Clara wrenched free, leaving Elias with one last look that carried more weight than any promise. Hope, fragile and burning, flickered to life inside him. After she left, silence settled again, heavy as stone. Jedediah chuckled from his cell. "Told you. Not everyone buys their lies." The night stretched on. Outside, coyotes howled across the desert, their cries carried on the wind. Elias sat, his thoughts turning from despair to resolve. If there was hope, however small, he could not let it die. He had endured long odds before. He would endure this. He had to. Near dawn, Colby strode back into the jail, his boots striking the floor like hammers. He carried a paper in hand, his smile smug. "Morning, Boone. Thought you should know. Jury's already spoken. No need for a trial. By order of this office, you'll hang at first light." The word struck like a bullet. Jedediah swore under his breath. Elias met Colby's gaze, refusing to flinch. "So that's it," he said quietly. "Hang an innocent man to bury your sins." Colby leaned close, his breath thick with whiskey. "Innocent or guilty don't matter none. What matters is that the town believes it. And they will. Come sunrise, you'll swing, and I'll still wear this star." The sheriff turned and left, the door slamming behind him. Elias sat in the dim light, his jaw tight, his pulse steady despite the storm inside. The dawn was coming, and with it the rope. But as the desert wind whistled through the cracks, carrying the scent of rain, Elias knew something else too. He would not go quiet. Whether by his hand or another's, the truth would not die with him. The gallows had been built overnight, rough timbers still damp with dew as the town gathered in uneasy silence. Dawn light spilled red across the horizon, painting the sky like blood, while a desert wind rattled the loose boards and carried the creak of the noose swaying above the scaffold. Elias Boone was let out in chains, his boots dragging against the packed earth. The sheriff and his deputies marched him forward with smug certainty, their faces lit by the cruel glow of victory. The crowd stood hushed, torn between fear and doubt, their whispers rising like restless spirits in the air. Elias climbed the wooden steps, each groan of the boards beneath him ringing like a death knell. His eyes swept across the people he had once called neighbors, men who had shared fence posts with him, women who had tasted bread from his hearth. Now they turned their faces away, ashamed or frightened, unwilling to meet his gaze. But a few held his eyes. Clara Dawson stood near the back, her shawl whipped by the wind, her jaw set hard. Young Tom clutched his father's sleeve, whispering fiercely. There was belief in their faces, belief enough to spark a fire in Elias's chest even as the noose brushed against his skin. Sheriff Colby raised a hand, his voice booming across the square. Justice will be served this day. Elias Boone, guilty of murder and theft, will pay the price with his life. He gestured for the hangman to move. Let this be a lesson. No man stands above the law. The rope was lowered, scratchy fibers brushing Elias's neck. His pulse thundered, but his eyes remained steady. He would not give Colby the satisfaction of fear. And then, as the hangman reached for the knot, chaos erupted. A crash split the morning. A wagon barreled into the square, its wheels ablaze, fire licking at the tarred boards. Horses screamed and reared, scattering the crowd. Flames leapt skyward, smoke rolling like thunderclouds. In the confusion, a shot rang out. Hale, the deputy, fell backward clutching his shoulder. Clara Dawson appeared through the smoke, pistol in hand, her eyes blazing with fury. "Move!" she cried, firing again, scattering men from the scaffold. Elias seized his chance. He wrenched his arms, the rope around his wrists half burned from the flames of the wagon's tar. With a violent twist, the chains gave enough slack for him to drive his shoulder into the hangman, sending the man sprawling. Clara tossed him a knife, its handle hot from the fire's glow. He slashed through the binding rope, his breath ragged, his heart wild. The noose fell away. Colby shouted, his revolver raised, but smoke stung his eyes, and the crowd surged in panic. Elias leapt from the scaffold, hitting the dirt hard, and rolled beneath the cover of the wagon. Clara was there, pulling him to his feet. "Go!" she shouted, her face streaked with soot. "You'll die if you stay." She thrust the knife back into his hand. "They won't stop hunting you." Before he could answer, more shots cracked, bullets splintering would near their heads. Elias sprinted for the alley, chains clattering, lungs burning, the desert calling to him like an old friend. Behind him, Colby's roar echoed through the smoke. "Bring him down. Don't let him leave alive." The desert swallowed him whole. By the time the sun climbed higher, Elias was miles from town, staggering through jagged canyons where the rocks glowed like embers. His throat burned with thirst, his hands raw from the chains he had yet to shed. He stopped only long enough to smash the weakened iron against a boulder until it broke free, his wrist bleeding, but his arms finally his own again. He drank from a shallow creek, the water tasting of earth and freedom, before pressing on. Riders followed. He could hear them in the distance, the thundering hooves of Colby's men, the shouts of bounty hunters promised coin for his head. Dust rose in the horizon behind him like the breath of some pursuing beast. He pressed into the canyons, into places only a scout would know, where shadows lay thick and trails vanished beneath shifting sands. Hunger gnawed at him. Thirst blistered his lips. But still he moved, driven by something fiercer than survival. He would not hang for another man's sins. He would not let corruption write his epitaph. Days blurred into nights. Storms broke over the plains, lightning shattering the sky, rain soaking him to the bone. He found shelter in caves, in abandoned cabins, in the hollow of dead cottonwoods. His body grew gaunt, his ribs sharp beneath torn cloth, but his spirit hardened like iron. Each step through the wilderness was a reminder of who he was. Not the framed rancher, not the shackled prisoner, but the man who had once tracked hostile riders through deserts and rivers, who had once faced death with calm hands and steady aim. One evening, beneath a sky split by lightning, Elias stumbled upon a campfire tucked into a ravine. Shapes rose, 2 drifters, rifles half-raised. Their faces were gaunt, their clothes ragged. "You lost, friend," one sneered, but his eyes softened when Elias staggered close, too weak to raise the knife in his hand. They gave him water, bread hard as stone, and listened as he spoke few words. When he told them the law was hunting him, their laughter held no surprise. "They hunt all of us," the older drifter said bitterly. "Colby's men? They're wolves with a star on their chest. Ain't no justice left in Dry Creek, or half the frontier for that matter." He showed Elias scars from a whipping, told of land stolen, of families crushed beneath lies. "You ain't the first, and you won't be the last." Later, as Elias pressed on alone, he crossed paths with a band of Comanche scouts, their faces painted for the hunt. They eyed him warily, but when he spoke of Colby and his lawmen, they exchanged knowing looks. "Your sheriff is a thief," one said in halting English. "He trades bullets for land, takes what he wants, leaves graves behind." They did not aid him further, but their words cut deep. The rot spread far wider than his own cell. At night, Elias lay beneath the stars, hunger gnawing, wounds stinging, but his mind sharp as steel. He saw now that this was not only his fight. The West itself was shackled, bound in fear and lies, its people crushed beneath the boots of men who twisted power to their will. He remembered Clara's face, fierce and unyielding. He remembered young Tom whispering in defense when no one else dared. He thought of Jedediah's rasping words in the cell. Lies rot a town quicker than drought. And he knew the old man had been right. The rot would spread until someone burned it out. On the 5th night, perched on a ridge overlooking the flicker of torchlight far below, Elias watched Colby's men scouring the land for him. Their shouts carried faintly, curses thrown into the wind. He raised his face to the stormy sky, the rain streaking down his scarred cheeks. His voice was low, but it carried to the empty night. "You can hunt me till the rivers run dry, but I'll come back, and when I do, the truth will rise from the ashes. The West will burn before I let your lies stand." The thunder answered him, rolling long and deep across the horizon, as though the land itself had heard his vow. Dry Creek slept uneasily that autumn, the air heavy with smoke from ranches burned in the night, the silence broken by the sound of horses' hooves pounding down lonely trails. Folks whispered that Elias Boone was dead, lost to the desert or shot by bounty hunters, and the sheriff encouraged those whispers, wearing them like a shield. Yet in the back rooms of the saloon, on porches of crumbling cabins, and in the hush of church pews, another story stirred, of a rider who had escaped the noose, a man who carried the weight of injustice in his eyes and a rifle across his back. That story crept through the town like fire in dry grass, and soon it was stronger than fear. Elias returned at twilight, cloaked by the gathering storm. He rode a borrowed horse, lean and scarred, and carried himself differently than the man who had once bent his back to a plow. Hunger and hardship had burned away softness, leaving iron in his gaze. The lines of his face hardened like the canyons he had crossed. His boots touched the dirt street of Dry Creek without a sound, and for a moment he stood still, watching the lanterns flicker in the windows of the saloon, the sheriff's star glinting faintly on the porch where deputies lounged with whiskey and smirks. They did not see him, not yet. He had become a shadow, a story made flesh. He did not go first to them. Instead, he moved through the alleys, to the small clapboard house at the edge of town where Clara Dawson lived. Her window glowed faintly, her silhouette bent over a lamp. He tapped once at the back door, and when she opened it, her breath caught. "Elias," she whispered, the name trembling like a prayer. "We thought you were gone." "I was," he said, his voice low, steady, "but I came back." She pulled him inside, bolting the door, her eyes wide with both fear and relief. He told her only fragments of what he'd endured, the storms, the hunger, the hunters. She listened in silence, and when he finished, she said, "They'll kill you if they know you're here. Colby's men rule with a chokehold now. Folks are scared." Her voice softened. "But they still remember who you are." "I didn't come back to hide," Elias answered. "I came to finish what they started." In the following days, whispers grew bolder. Farmers whose herds had been stolen, widows whose sons had been beaten for speaking out, cowhands cheated of wages. All began to listen when Elias's name was spoken. One by one, they found their way to him. Secret meetings in barns and abandoned sheds, the flicker of lanterns casting shadows against rough-hewn walls. An old soldier brought him cartridges hidden since the war. A young hand offered him a rifle smuggled from the sheriff's own armory. They came not just for Elias, but for themselves, for justice that had been buried too long beneath Colby's lies. The price of defiance was high. Clara bore the brunt of it, sheltering Elias when Colby's men scoured the town. She lied to deputies, hiding food and supplies, risking her life each time they searched her house. One night, when McKinnon cornered her in the street and accused her of harboring Boone, she stood unflinching, her voice clear. "If you think I'd waste my time on lies, you don't know me half as well as you think." The deputy struck her, a blow meant to humiliate, but her silence afterward was louder than any scream. Elias saw the bruise on her face and swore under his breath. Her sacrifice bound his resolve tighter than chains ever had. The first crack in Colby's armor came in the saloon. Elias walked through the swinging doors at dusk, the room thick with cigar smoke and the smell of cheap whiskey. Conversations died mid-sentence, chairs scraping back as every eye turned. Hale and McKinnon sat at their usual table, boasting loudly, pistols at their hips. When they saw him, their laughter faltered, the color draining from their faces. Elias stood tall, his hat low, his voice cutting through the silence. "Thought you left me for dead," he said. "Turns out you were wrong." Hale fumbled for his revolver, but Elias moved quicker. His shot cracked like thunder, splintering the bottle on the table inches from the deputy's hand. Whiskey spilled, glass shattered, and the room erupted in screams and scrambling boots. Elias didn't waver. "Next one goes through your skull," he said calmly, his rifle steady. "Tell Colby I'm back. Tell him the truth. Don't hang easy." The deputies bolted, leaving the saloon in stunned silence. Elias holstered his rifle and turned to the crowd. "You've all seen their lies. You've all paid their price. It ends when we say it ends." No one answered aloud, but in their eyes, in the tightening of jaws and the clenched fists, he saw it, the spark catching, the ember beginning to glow. The days that followed shook the frontier. Colby's men struck back, burning cattle ranches of those who whispered support for Boone. The sky above Dry Creek filled with smoke, black plumes rising against the sunset. Families fled their homes, children crying as flames devoured barns and fields. Tension gripped every soul. The town balanced on a knife's edge. Men carried rifles to the well. Women kept shotguns behind doors. It was no longer law that ruled. It was fear and the threat of fire. But Elias did not waver. He moved among them like a ghost, appearing at night to speak with farmers, riding with cowhands to guard herds, standing by widows whose homes were threatened. Each act, small as it seemed, chipped away at the sheriff's hold. He was no longer just a man. They had made him into something larger, a symbol that lived in stories whispered around kitchen tables and fire pits. And symbols could not be chained. The storm came to a head one night when Elias found Clara waiting at the church steps, her face pale. "Colby's gathering his men," she told him. "They mean to finish this once and for all. If they catch you, they'll burn the town to cover it." Her voice trembled, but her eyes held steady. "You can't keep running." Elias looked at her, the weight of everything pressing down. He thought of the hunger in the desert, the chains in the cell, the fire of injustice that refused to die. He thought of Claire's bruised cheek, of Tom's whispered protest, of the old soldier's cartridges offered with shaking hands. He thought of the West itself, wide and broken, waiting for someone to stand. and he knew running was no longer an option. He mounted the church steps, his voice carrying into the night, cutting through the silence like a blade. "Colby," he called, his tone sharp as the crack of a rifle. "You've hunted me, lied about me, burned this land to ash. But your time's done." His voice rose, echoing down the darkened street. "At dawn we settle this. You and me. No lies, no chains. Just the truth between us." The town shuddered in the silence that followed. From the shadows of porches and doorways, faces emerged, drawn by the sound, by the promise. The wind carried Elias's words across the empty street, across the burned fields, into the hearts of the people. Somewhere beyond, the sheriff heard them too, and he would know there was no turning back. The night held its breath, the stars shrouded by smoke. Dawn was coming, and with it, the reckoning. The first light of dawn slid over Dry Creek, painting the sky in pale gold, while the town square lay hushed beneath its glow. Boards creaked as shutters opened one by one, faces peering out into the stillness. No bird sang, no dogs barked. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. A gallows still stood in the square, dark and silent, a grim reminder of the man who had once stood there with a noose at his neck. Now, that same man walked calmly into the center of town, boots striking the dirt with the steady rhythm of inevitability. Elias Boone looked older, harder, but there was no fear in him. The people saw it in the way he carried himself, shoulders square, gaze sharp, a man not broken by chains, but reforged by them. He stood not as a fugitive, not as a rancher, but as something greater. To the frightened, he was courage. To the wronged, he was justice. His shadow stretched long in the morning light as the sheriff's men began to gather, pistols at their hips, smirks twisting their faces. They had come to finish him, confident as ever, believing the law was theirs to command. Sheriff Colby emerged from the saloon, star glinting on his chest, revolver heavy at his side. He sneered as his eyes found Elias. "You should have stayed dead, Boone. This town don't need ghosts stirring up trouble." Elias's voice carried calm and clear, echoing against the walls of every building. "I'm no ghost, Colby. I'm the truth you tried to bury." His hand rested near his holster, steady as stone. "And today, everyone will see it." The crowd thickened at the edges of the square, townsfolk drawn from homes and barns, farmers with dirt still on their hands, widows clutching children close. Clara Dawson stood among them, her face pale but fierce, eyes locked on Elias. She had given everything to keep him alive long enough for this moment. Now she stood as both witness and shield of his resolve. Colby laughed, though it rang hollow. "Boys," he said to his deputies, "teach him what happens when a man spits on the law." Hale and McKinnon stepped forward, revolvers drawn. But before they could fire, a shout cut through the air. "That's no law you carry," cried old Jedediah, leaning on a cane as he pushed through the crowd. His ragged voice was fierce, defiant. "It's theft and murder dressed in a star." Murmurs rippled across the square, others nodding, voices rising, each one a spark feeding a growing flame. Colby's face darkened. "Shut your mouth, old man," he barked, but the tide was shifting. The people who had once lowered their eyes now lifted them, staring hard at the men who claimed to rule them. Truth, once whispered, now swelled to a roar. Elias drew, not in haste, but with the calm precision of a man who had been born with a rifle in his hand. His revolver flashed in the morning sun, and Hale's gun was struck clean from his grasp before he could even pull the trigger. The deputy yelped, clutching his bleeding hand as the weapon clattered into the dust. McKinnon hesitated, sweat breaking on his brow. He fired wildly, the shot splintering a post near Elias's head. But Elias did not flinch. His second bullet struck true, grazing McKinnon's temple and sending him sprawling into the dirt, his nerve broken. The square erupted. Colby roared and drew his pistol, firing with practiced speed. But Elias was faster. He rolled, dust exploding around him, his rifle raised now, his body moving with the grace of the scout he once had been. Shots cracked like thunderclaps, smoke coiling in the air. Townsfolk scattered for cover, but their eyes never left the fight. Colby's men fell one by one, not only from Elias's hand, but from the rebellion that had been stoked in the hearts of the people. Farmers armed with old muskets returned fire. Cowhands swung rifles from porches. A widow leveled a shotgun from behind a rain barrel, scattering one deputy with a blast of buckshot. The lie that had ruled Dry Creek was crumbling, and the sound of its collapse was gunfire and fury. Colby fought like a cornered wolf, ducking behind barrels, his revolver spitting flame. His voice was raw with rage. "You think these people care about you, Boone? They'll cheer today, but they'll forget you tomorrow." He fired again, missing by inches. Elias moved closer, step by step, each stride cutting the distance like a verdict. His eyes burned, not with hate, but with the weight of justice long denied. "You framed me to hide your crimes," Elias said, his voice steady even as bullets screamed past. "You took their land, their coin, their sons. You turned law into a weapon." He raised his revolver, the barrel glinting. "That ends now." The two men stood face to face, silence hanging for a heartbeat, the town watching with bated breath. Colby raised his pistol, lips curling in defiance. Elias fired first. The sheriff's revolver dropped from his hand as he staggered back, a dark bloom spreading across his chest. His eyes widened, disbelief etched into his final breath before he crumpled into the dust. The square fell still. Smoke drifted in the air, curling around bodies and barrels, the acrid stench of powder heavy on the wind. Elias stood motionless, his revolver lowered, his chest rising and falling with measured breaths. For a moment, no one moved. Then Clara stepped forward, her voice breaking the silence. "It's done." The words carried like a prayer, and then like a shout as the townsfolk repeated them, voices swelling until the whole square echoed with it. "It's done." The deputies who remained dropped their guns, their faces pale with fear. No one rushed to pick them up. The people of Dry Creek had seen enough. Tyranny had fallen with the crack of a bullet, and justice had risen from its ashes. Elias turned, meeting the eyes of the crowd. He saw relief, awe, even tears. He did not smile, for the weight of all that had been lost pressed too heavy on his soul. Yet he saw hope too, fragile but alive, and that was enough. He holstered his revolver, the leather creaking softly, and spoke. "I wasn't guilty," he said simply, his voice raw. "But even if I had been, no man deserves to die by lies. Let this town remember, the law belongs to the people, not to the wolves who wear it." The words sank deep, etched into hearts and memory. For years to come, ballads would be sung of Elias Boone, the man who was framed, who escaped the noose, who returned not as a fugitive, but as a reckoning. Around campfires, his name would be whispered like legend, a tale of chains broken, of truth unburied, of the West that burned bright with justice because one man refused to bow. As the sun climbed higher, spilling golden light across the blood-streaked dirt, Elias stepped away from the gallows that had once marked his grave. Behind him, Dry Creek breathed free for the first time in years. Ahead, the frontier stretched wide and wild, waiting. He walked into it not as a broken man, but as something larger, justice carved in flesh, a legend born beneath the desert sky.